Guys. I'm Michael Logan with TV Guide, and it's such an honor to be here. This is an amazing show. Just genius, genius. And we have two geniuses who are responsible for it with us. I'd like you to meet first the creator of the show. You may know his work from the HBO series Bored to Death. His novels are amazing. Please welcome Jonathan Ames. And I can't think of anything greater in an actor's career than to have achieved the success that Patrick Stewart has, and then to continue to be able to surprise us and dazzle us in something like this. That we've never seen this out of this guy before, and it just makes you wonder what else, what other gold is in there. Please welcome Sir Patrick Stewart. Well,
you want me to wear my jacket?
So yeah.
No, I'm actually warm. I envy you not having it on.
Okay, right. So we covered all the sartorial parameters of this: jacket on, jacket off, shirt out.
So the beginning is always a good place to start. How did you two come together for this project? Seth MacFarlane, of course, brought you together. But what happened when you two sat down and talked?
Well, how it began, Seth was looking for something for Patrick and looking for a writer to come up with something. And so the night before I was to get on the phone with with Seth, I happened to be channel surfing and I stopped at CNN and I saw Piers Morgan at his desk, kind of with this very, eye candy blue background. And I suddenly imagine Patrick Stewart behind such a desk and what presence he would have. And so the next day on the phone with Seth, he said, "Do you have any ideas?" And I said, "Well, what about Patrick Stewart as a kind of cable news host, but we live behind the scenes like the Larry Sanders Show?" And I don't know, this is what I said. And Seth said, "I love it." And then I guess he was talking to other writers, but I was the only one who came up with an idea that he liked. And then very shortly thereafter, Seth must have told Patrick the idea. And then Patrick and I were both living in Brooklyn at the time. And you could tell the next about our first date if you want.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for turning up for this. It's terrific to see so many colleagues and members here. I've been working with Seth for, I think, 12 years now, doing the voice of Avery Bullock on American Dad. And this was the first time that I had been specifically invited to do comedy, and a certain kind of comedy, a rather sort of risque, somewhat dangerous, reckless kind of comedy, and I liked it. And Seth liked it too, and so Avery became a permanent part of American Dad. And he called up one day and said, "Let's have lunch, something I want to talk about." And I said, "Great." We arranged it for a Monday lunchtime. And a couple of days before that, I realized that this was the Monday morning after Seth had hosted the Academy Awards. So I got on the phone and said, "You're crazy. Yeah, Monday morning after your Academy Awards hosting, you will either be in handcuffs on a plane being flown out of the country, or you'll be locked up somewhere, or you'll be in hiding. No, let's reschedule." And he said, no. And he turned up bright and bushy-tailed at 12:30 in the morning and turning many heads in Bouchon, who had only seen him a few hours earlier hosting the Academy Awards. And he said, "Okay, I got this idea. Half-hour comedy show, live action, You as the center of it, and I don't know what it would be, but are you up for something like that? And I said, absolutely, yeah. And we shook hands on a deal right there in the table. And then we talked about baseball or music or something. So you can see how easy Jonathan is to negotiate with. Both our experiences were very simple. Well, yeah, we both live in Brooklyn because we're both so fashionable, as it's obvious to see. We met for coffee in a little coffee shop down 6th Avenue. I've been telling the story as if it were 5th Avenue. My wife put me right and said, oh, you fool, it was 6th Avenue. Get the location of the coffee shop right. And that became our meeting place for the next, on and off, for the next 6 or 8 weeks. We would meet every couple of weeks. But they were curious meetings. I arrived as a fan because I had read Jonathan's novel, Wake Up, Sir, and loved it. And instead of sitting down and trying to work out plot lines and stories and character, Jonathan just encouraged me to talk about myself and my interests and my enthusiasms or passions and even personal, private incidents in my life. I mean, I don't know how many of you saw a later episode in which the question of Walter's being circumcised or not came up. Well, that happened to me.
but yeah, that happened to you. But what they might not know is that Patrick was. We all have gaps in our knowledge. You know, people mention an author. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I haven't read them. Well, Patrick was under the impression that he was circumcised, but then he found out after he got married again recently. His wife said it somehow came up, I don't know, at dinner or something. And she said, you are not circumcised. And he said, I am. And they had their first fight. And but then Patrick went to his doctor, and he said, you are definitely not circumcised. And I heard this story, and I said, oh, my God. Well, you know, shocking on a number of levels. And I said, we have to give that story to Walter Blunt. So we built a whole episode around it, in which, it being a news show, there was a gentleman on the news show who's on the UN Commission to eradicate genital mutilation, and which is, you know, anyway, it comes up that some people do consider male circumcision to be genital mutilation, and that's hard to say. And anyway, Walter on his news show tells this gentleman, well, I'm not circumcised, but this man had been with Walter, I'm giving away the whole plot, in the men's room earlier and happened to glance down at him at the urinal, as men sometimes do, not the three of us. And anyway, so we worked it into the plot, and it was a lot of fun.
That was just an example of
Now, you actually had some trouble. I recall you telling me that you and Sir Ben Kingsley had gotten into some trouble with your comedy back in the early days of the Royal Shakespeare Company. Talk about how you were reprimanded.
It's not true to say that comedy is entirely alien to me, because there was a time in my career I worked for quite a few years consistently, not doing anything else with the Royal Shakespeare Company. And there was a whole crowd of us, young actors, who just wanted to do Shakespeare and weren't really interested in TV or movies or anything like that. And among the young actors, some who were, two of them, Ben Kingsley and Roger Rees, may he rest in peace, were spear carriers. They were just Ben and Roger were background. They didn't have a line to speak in the first season at Stratford-on-Avon. Helen Mirren was in the company at the same time, too. She was already beginning to get interesting roles, but we were all committed to this principle of company and Shakespeare, and ensemble. But being ensemble and being a kind of, the Royal Shakespeare Company was very much a cooperative at that time. So there was no hierarchy as such, which was a wonderful thing to experience, because the hierarchy was only about the texts. And Ben and myself were cast a year after we had joined the company in a production of Much Ado About Nothing. There are two minor characters called Conrad, played by Ben Kingsley, and Baraccio, played by myself. And they're two comedy villains. They get into a lot of trouble. They screw things up. Everybody is irritated about them. Well, Ben and I really enjoyed this double act we'd worked out. But the double act expanded so much as the run wore on, that there was finally a formal deputation by the leading actors of the company, Janet Sussman and Alan Howard and Helen Mirren, that we should be restrained. Because we worked out comedy business and routines and stuff, and the evening was just getting longer and longer and longer. Not because of Beatrice and Benedict, but because of Conrad and Baraccio. So I have said, yes, I was, for a period of time, first choice low comic with the Royal Shakespeare Company. I played Touchstone, I played Baraccio, I played Grumio in Taming of the Shrew, and other, you know, sort of lowlifes, you might call them. But it was of a different nature from the style that what is so exciting to me about Blunt Talk is that when Jonathan and I sat down in that coffee shop on 6th Avenue, nothing really existed. Nothing. There were just two guys sitting in a cafe drinking coffee. And when almost 2 years later, I walked onto the studio set of Blunt Talk for the first time and saw the reality of it and met the extraordinary ensemble cast that Jonathan and the directors had assembled, I was overwhelmed how those conversations had suddenly become 5 hours of television, or, as Jonathan likes to say, at least 3 mini-movies we made in the space of those 4 months. So it has been liberating, fun beyond measure. You know, that we should, all of us, enjoy ourselves all the time. And get paid for it. Thank you very much, SAG-AFTRA. I'm going to shut up in a minute. I promise to God I'm going to shut up in a minute. But I was out of the United States for the last 7 episodes of the series. I saw the first 3 in my home in Brooklyn. And I kind of lost touch with how it was going. You know, you don't meet people on the streets or in a cafe where they say, oh, no, I don't like your new show very much, or whatever. But so hearing from Jonathan this morning and Michael that this screening has gone very well is really encouraging, because at the moment, I don't have a too detailed sense of what we've achieved, partly because we are blessed. Thank you, stars. Thank you, Chris Albrecht, by having a second season booked before we started the first one. So it's an ongoing story, and we would like it to have legs, but who knows? But for now, the pleasure that we're all getting out of being these characters in this world is very, very deep.
2 thoughts, just to... hearing Patrick talk about the ensemble, and I made a connection now because on our set, the Blunt Talk family, you know, or his team sort of became a family, and Patrick was very much the leader of that. And so hearing you talk about, you know, where you basically grew up in acting was about ensemble and everyone working together, and that was very much the case on our set, where, you know, we all came to really be happy to see each other. And I had hoped that would happen because the characters themselves are kindly to each other, that it makes it easier for the actors to get along well, because they don't have to go into a scene where they're being rude or caustic to each other, but that they're sort of, you know, even if they annoy each other, they're ultimately trying to pull together. But just hearing you talk about, you know, your early years of ensemble acting sort of makes sense for the feeling we had on set. And then the other thought I had hearing you talk about the Royal Shakespeare Company, early on in this process, when it looked like it was moving forward, and we got MRC, this company, involved. They were going to pay me to write the script, and then we would go out with the first script. So I emailed Patrick, because I was thinking a lot about the character. From the very early on, I had this image of him alone at a bar at the Sunset Tower, which was my original idea, because that's where I would always stay when I came to LA. Anyway, I emailed Patrick, what should we call this fellow? And I had some notions. I wanted something that sounded elegant, and I had some ideas. And Patrick emailed back, how about Walter Blunt? That's the first role I had played in Shakespeare, and I used to use it as an alias. And I saw that email, and we were in real time together, and I go, oh my God, that's perfect. Walter Blunt. We'll call his new show Blunt Talk, and then our show should be called Blunt Talk, you know, Blunt Talk about Blunt Talk. And I wrote back, I love that. We should call the two shows Blunt Talk. And he wrote back, I love it. So it was like an immediate, this friend of mine wrote this book about the power of collaboration, you know, and like what you talked about, we began in a cafe, there was nothing. Then 2 years later, we're on a set with a news desk and Jacki Weaver and Timm Sharp and Dolly Wells and Mary Holland and Karan Soni and Richard Lewis, and suddenly a world out of nothing came something, but it, you know, it all starts with collaboration. So anyway, again, Walter Blunt was another, you know, early role for Patrick in the Royal Shakespeare Company.
You know, this all sounds remarkably easy, doesn't it? It just seems like it's just...
Well, not exactly.
Well,
I mean,
there
as
were
Patrick
some struggles somewhere.
Yeah, well, when we're shooting, you know, working 70, 80-hour weeks, driving way the hell out to Santa Clarita where we shoot, and then, you know, no, it's a lot of work and a lot of stress, and you know, and wondering while we're doing it, is this working? You know, because I'd be in the editing room and I'm laughing, but, you know, so there's so much fear and anxiety, but at the same time, there is that laughter. There's those wonderful moments at the monitor when I would feel, you know, watching Patrick do take after take, being so present for all, you know, his fellow actors and what everyone would bring. So it's a mix. I mean, you know, agony and the ecstasy, as they say in the Bible.
One of the extraordinary things about this show is the physical comedy, and you're struck with how rarely people do physical comedy anymore. Melissa McCarthy certainly makes a career of it, but it's, you know, in this era of sort of heady comedy, verbal comedy, snarky comedy, we don't have this great physicality, and you've consistently built that into this show. There's a sequence, second or third episode, where Walter is struggling with a toilet paper seat cover, and it's the most, you know, like the most hilarious thing you've ever seen. And you know, it's Chaplin-esque. It's, you know, it's Inspector Clouseau, and we don't see that kind of comedy much. What made you incorporate that? In addition to the fact there are all these, you know, this is a show about issues. We're talking about genital mutilation and racial profiling, or we're talking about environmental pollution, and then you have all this, you know, crazy coconut lunatic stuff thrown into it too. It should not work, but it does. But what about that physical comedy you keep putting in?
Well, I guess for me as a kid, you know, I loved Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello and even early Woody Allen. I always loved the physical comedy. And then also, too, the scripts are kind of musical. Like, you have moments of pathos and feeling between Harry and Walter. And then maybe I'm getting bored writing it, and I want to see someone running and tripping and, you know, or, you know, struggling with the electronic eye behind a toilet seat. You know, that was based on my own experience. I'd go to airport bathrooms. The thing would be flushing constantly. I never could get water. I have a weird response to machines. And then Patrick enacted it so fantastically. So I don't know. It's just trying to keep the scripts lively and then, you know, mix, you know, it feels like music. You have quiet scenes, you have quick verbal scenes, then you have physical scenes. And it's just to, I don't know, always, the first day of shooting, I said, well, let's try to make something entertaining for, you know, people out there, to give them some pleasure and some relief and some distraction, and that's our goal. And so I think we all get a kick out of physical comedy. It's very hard to pull off, and but we enjoy it, and I try to, most every episode, try to have at least one moment of physical comedy.
Mm-hmm. It looks exhausting. I mean, I look at some of these episodes. How is your stamina through this?
I admit, I struggled at times. I was 74 then, and I told Jonathan, look, I'm 1 year older when we shoot the second season. I'll be 75. And my PR company have said to me, never tell journalists or audiences how hard the work was, because they'll think, you just think you're a douchebag, you know. I mean, you've got this wonderful career, this great life, you're doing this brilliant show. Don't complain about how hard the work is. So I try not to, but it was a little intense at times. And they have promised that it's going to be a little easier, the second season. What will be, because I've never, yes, I've been in one series before. I was in a series for 7 years.
You may have heard of it.
178 episodes of television and 4 movies. And my feeling about Blunt Talk is the same as it was about The Next Generation, that our story will not be over until the director calls, or the first calls, that's a wrap, on the final day of the final episode of filming, because it's not that each episode is an entirely complete narrative, but I look on those 10 episodes that we made of like chapters in a book, in a novel, and the fact that Jonathan is a wonderful novelist, it cannot be disconnected from that. So we, I'm sure I'm talking to people who know this already and have experienced it firsthand, but every single hour on the set was a process of exploration, because Jonathan was producing situations, character developments, and plot lines that we had, as characters, never encountered before. So each one was like an expanding character who was growing with the experiences of each episode. And no matter how long we go, I think we're going to be telling a long, single story about these people who I hope that the audience can identify with and grow to love, because I already am passionately in love with all of them, including Richard Lewis, who is a brilliant Freudian analyst in our show, with certain problems of his own, and a just amazing spirit to have on the set. We have someone like Richard, and we have Mary Holland and Dolly Wells do stand-up, and so does Karen Sony. But then we have in Richard Lewis the historic, authentic person of stand-up, of doing comedy alone and being so experienced in that world. And to have him sitting with us on the stage has been a great privilege. Just one of the details that has made this such a nice experience.
Yeah. One of the things that's so unique about this too is that there's such a such a sweetness, such a warmth to this show. You could have been quite scathing about the world of cable news. You could have, this could have been a very different show, same characters, but could have gone in many different directions. But there's such an incredible warmth. You write to that all the time. Talk about that, because we are in an era of great dark television, and we love it and eat it up. But there's genuine happiness in this show.
Yeah, well, I guess it sort of started with Bored to Death, which was my beginning in television, and I wanted to create a comedy where people, after you finished watching an episode, felt good about being alive or were uplifted in some way, even, and that just sort of became the goal. And I had noticed, trying to hire other writers, I would see everyone's sample scripts, and in every script, the characters were so incredibly unkind to each other. And I don't have a lot of friends, but I thought my friends aren't like that to me, and I'm not like that to them. I don't feel that this is realistic. So I just sort of started doing this thing where I wanted the characters to love each other and for the audience to feel good after the end of an episode of Blunt Talk or Bored to Death. Now, you know, dark things could happen, or someone can be unkind, of course, but I think I wanted the experience I had as a child growing up, that I enjoyed the comedies that were exuberant and made me feel good at the end of an episode, and that people could come to the show and feel a little less alone after watching, and laugh, and have people say provocative things. And so it's not something I want to be too conscious of, but it is an ethos that, the characters might be flawed and even do things that might be considered immoral or amoral. I don't know the words I'm using, but ultimately they come around to caring for each other.
Let's have some questions. You guys have submitted some. This is from Jewel. What is the worst advice you've ever received about acting, Sir Patrick?
Worst advice? Very early on in my career, well, it wasn't even in my career. It was my last day at drama school, my last day as a student actor, and we'd done all our school shows, and the agents and managers had come to see them, and so many we had a very, very talented year. They'd got jobs already. They got jobs before all the final showings had happened, and I had got nothing. In fact, I shared a dressing room with the star of the year, which was a mistake. I should not have done that, because after the performances, everybody came backstage, and they only wanted to meet dear Robin Phillips. May he rest in peace. So many of our colleagues and companions have died in the last 12 months. It's been ghastly. And so when they, after the first experience of having people come in, shower Robin with praise, and then become aware in an embarrassed way that I was also in the room and they didn't know what to say to me, that I took, when the knock came on the door, I would open the door and then stand behind it until they left. Then they had Robin all to themselves. That was how insecure I was. And sitting in the auditorium of the theater after the last performance, one of the acting teachers came to see me, and he said, "What's the matter? Why aren't you having fun at the party? Come on, everybody. It's the last day of your year." And I said, I just don't feel good. I think I've messed up. I can't see any future. I haven't had any kind of offer, no responses at all to the 80 letters that I'd written to repertory companies. And he said, "May I speak frankly to you? Whenever anybody asks that question," yes, say, "I'm sorry. No, I'd rather you didn't." But stupidly, I said, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "The next 20 years are going to be really hard for you." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're a character actor, Patrick." I looked like this, you see. I had no hair, lost my hair. "You're a character actor, but nobody's going to want to employ a 19-year-old character actor. You know, in your late 30s and your 40s, that's when you're going to come into your own. Or else, maybe you should just give it up now." The best piece of advice I was ever given was given to me about 3 months before that, when the principal of my school, brilliant acting teacher, Duncan Ross, who ran Seattle, the Seattle rep, and the Drama Institute in Seattle for years and years. And he said to me at the end of a very difficult meeting he and I had had, "Patrick, you will never achieve success." He paused while my face fell. He said then, "by ensuring against failure." I got it, or I thought I did, but I didn't really, because it must have taken 25 years to really grasp what he meant about ensuring against failure. That you have to risk failure in order to do well. You have to risk. You have to meet challenges. You have to be bold. You have to be brave. Otherwise, Otherwise, you're shortchanging your audience and the people you work with, your directors, your fellow actors, and so forth. That was a very long answer to a very simple question.
Good answer.
Well, let's flash forward to a big event that happened to Patrick Stewart a few years ago when he was knighted by the Queen. What is that experience like? What is it like to get that letter and find out that news?
I almost didn't get the knighthood because I just arrived on location. We were filming our stage production of Macbeth, which aired on PBS. And we were in a really miserable part of the British Midlands in a small and really rather unpleasant motel. And we'd been filming for about 10 days, and one morning, very early, a November morning, and it was wet and miserable outside, I opened the closet to get my coat out, and I saw this plastic bag on the floor and realized, oh my God, that's all the mail I brought up from London, and it's still lying there. I haven't opened it. I got 10 minutes, I'll just go through it. And so I quickly rifled through it, and there was this brown envelope that said Cabinet Office on the front of it. And I thought, what the heck is this? I opened it up, and at about 5:30 in the morning in this brown room, it was all brown, I read that I was being offered a knighthood. And it was quite unreal. And I looked at the brown walls and I read the letter again, just like they do in bad plays. And I read it a third time, because I couldn't grasp that this was happening to me. And of course, the thing is, you are told, if you accept this, you must tell no one that you've got it. And that day we were shooting the banquet scene on the set. And so all the Macbeth company were there for that scene. And I wanted to run on and say, guys, you'll never guess what's happened. But I couldn't do that. I had to keep it to myself. The day itself was extraordinary. I'd been once before because they very graciously gave me an Order of the British Empire, I think in 2000. And my brother and his wife came, which was fantastic. He's older than me. And my now wife came with us as well. And the Queen performed the ceremony, which was charming. And indeed, all the things that you expect actually happen. You kneel in front of her. But there's a special piece of furniture to kneel on. It's a stool, a padded stool about so high. But on one side of it, it has a railing like this, because some of us, when we have to kneel down, can't always get up too easily. So they very kindly provide you with this thing to heave yourself up with. And I remember kneeling there and still finding the whole experience quite unreal. And I'd seen her stepping towards me, and I'd looked down, and then I looked up, because you're kind of uneasy about making eye contact with Her Majesty. And she had this sword in her hand, and I have no idea where it came from. She hadn't had it 10 seconds earlier. And first on my right shoulder, and then on my left. And what I saw, because I was seeing this in intense close-up, was that after the tap on the right shoulder, as she moved the sword over my head, she twisted her hand so that it actually touched my other shoulder with the other side of the blade. A detail which I think might easily be missed if you were not seeing it in close-up as I did. So it's something that I still have difficulty believing in. When I was a kid, my heroes were Sir John Gielgud, Sir Laurence Olivier, Sir Alec Guinness, Sir Cedric Hardwicke. You know, these were the giants of British theatre, and now I find that, you know, Sir Ian McKellen, Sir Derek Jacobi, Sir Michael Caine, Sir Sean Connery. Suddenly, we've become that generation, and it's both an unnerving feeling because it's I don't know, the kind of responsibility goes with it, and I sometimes find the responsibility a bit nerve-wracking.
What would your parents have thought of that?
Oh, how many times in the last 25, 30 years have I wished they could have responded to things. I mean, Star Trek was one of them. My father in particular would have been so thrilled and proud about that. And Yeah, I thought of my father very much. I'm very active in an organization called Combat Stress in England, which is about veterans returning from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Iran, wherever, with PTSD. And I was at an event for Combat Stress, and the Prince of Wales was attending, and he was going around all the little groups, as they do, talking to them, and he came to the group I was in, and he said, "Patrick, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, sir, I'm a patron of the organization." He said, "I had no idea." And then he stepped close to me and said, "Tell me about your father, because he's got a rather extraordinary story, hasn't he?" And he literally took me to one side. And an hour later, I was walking in the rain down Pall Mall, because the event had been at St. James's Palace. And I thought, if only I could say to my father, "By the way, the Prince of Wales asked about you today." It would have been fantastic, you know.
This is a question from Ryan. Was there ever a time you doubted your abilities as an actor? If so, how did you overcome?
Yeah, I spent a lot of years insecure, easily intimidated, always thinking the other person was right, whether a director or a fellow actor or a designer who wanted me to wear a particular costume or something, always thinking that they knew better. And then one day I stopped feeling like that and found a voice, which for all kinds of reasons I had not been able to use. You know, after this guy had told me the next 20 years are going to be very hard for you, I was 19, I hadn't even lived 20 years, and actually I was constantly, within 2 weeks, employed for the next 14 years. I was never without a job. And so he was wrong. He got, no. And, but then something happened, and I began to believe in myself a little bit more than I had done. And that continues. It's an ongoing process. I should add, thanks to coming to California in 1987 and living here for 17 years, outstanding 5-star therapy. Believe me. Thank you, Los Angeles. Thank you, Hollywood. It works. It really does. And to find that you have a voice well, the voice says it all, you know. So, does that answer your question? Why not ask the same question to Jonathan?
Why don't we?
What was it again?
Have you ever doubted your abilities as a writer?
Oh, I think always, and still, I think I always doubt it. And but I used to teach a lot, and in the same way that I was thinking with Patrick being on set, having worked with an ensemble, I think I taught, well, at least for a dozen or more years, endless writing classes. That kind of prepared me to be on set. And because as the creator and the showrunner, I need to educate everyone what I have in mind, from the DP, the director, the costume designer, the cast, and my writing team. And so I really need to communicate. And I think a lot of that, not in a dictatorial way, helped with teaching. And then also I used to put on like vaudeville shows in New York, and that was something too that helped with this job, which was like curating and bringing people together. But I think every step of the way one feels insecure. I would always tell my writers there's always going to be much more rejection, my students, much more rejection than acceptance. But I also, at some point, I think it was my second novel, might have been, my best book had been rejected by about 20 publishers, and I was going to sort of give up on writing, but I didn't have any other skills really. But at the time, I later felt that, all right, the more I'm rejected might be the sign that my work is strong or that my voice is strong, because people will be scared of something that is maybe trying to be itself. But, you know, so I think one's always battling, but then there's the quiet moments, like when I go home this afternoon, for me, I like to make things. And I like to make a sentence or try to write a line of dialogue that Patrick will really enjoy, or to make each sentence or each line interesting. And I don't know, it's like Patrick says, California, you take a breath, you just try to do your thing, you hope for the best, and then you have an open mind because, you know, to hear other people's feedback, but then you have to be strong and not take everything. And I don't know, I think one's always insecure. I don't know that I'll ever feel too secure, but I don't know, but you just keep trying. I think the main thing with being an artist is to persevere and to want to make things and then to want to give other people something. So that if your goal is to give something to another person, that helps with the work, so that the joy I receive from books or from films, then maybe I'll try to give that to someone else. And maybe that helps with the fear a little bit if that's your goal.
Yeah. Well, we have to wrap it up, but one last question. Jonathan is starting to write season 2, so could you give us a little preview of where you're going to take this amazing... This will be news to... This will be news to everybody. Where are you going to take this already extraordinary and complex and unbelievably wonderful character?
Well, in fact, Patrick and I are going to meet tonight and with our producing director and kind of walk him through the season. This year, I'm going to try to do something a little bit different in that while the characters continued to build, we were kind of learning about Walter and learning about everyone and kind of getting to know them. In each episode, we got to know them a little bit more. And each episode was kind of somewhat a discrete story with storylines that we're following, and very much, as Patrick said, you know, almost a novel that we were all creating together, because I wrote the first 4 episodes without ever having heard anyone speak a line, because we didn't do a pilot. We just got a 2-season order right off the bat. So it was very hard to write for people never having heard them speak or how they'll inhabit the characters. And so once everyone began acting and people emerged and someone, you know, actually is rather sad, you know, you bring on an actor. And, well, I wrote a role for this fellow, Wendell Middlebrooks. He auditioned for a number of roles, wasn't quite right for any of those roles, but I loved him. A lot of times, unfortunately, you have to watch auditions on video, but these were early on, and I was in the room, and I just loved him every time. And so I'm like, you know, I'm going to create a role for him. So I created a role for him. He came on set, was fantastic. I began to write him into future episodes. Unfortunately, he passed away after his episode, but he was a real joy on set, and we heard from his people that he came home from work every day on Bluntalk and said, I'm having so much fun. So that was some consolation for us. But I bring up that story just to say that it evolves, you know, because you see chemistry between characters that you don't expect, and so then you start writing for it more towards the end of the season. Well, anyway, this season, knowing all that, things will still evolve. You know, we'll see a storyline, or someone will do an improvisation, and maybe they're more flirty than you thought, and you're like, you know what? Let's build this towards a romance, and you know, and then you rejigger it. It's kind of like, you know, having an architectural plan and then being like, oh, let's have a wing over here. But that said, we're going to have one particular story that Walter is going to follow throughout the whole season. And I don't know if it gives one thing away, but a woman from his past also comes into the season. And so it's going to be a big love story, based again, though, on something Patrick told me back in June. He told me this amazing scene, and actually tonight I want to get the exact dialogue again, because I've written the scene. I'm already on page 22 of the first episode, second season. But Patrick told me a scene which kind of lit a fire under me for his arc for the season, and from Patrick's life. So, and I said to you, which I hope you recall, depending on how many drinks we may have had, that I said, can I use that? And you said yes. And I was like, okay. So we've only built the whole season on it. So anyway, this is all very vague, but, you know, we're going to want to entertain. I liked every episode to have like a beautiful image. In transitioning from books to this medium, I came to realize, like, even within our budget or our shooting schedule, that we can have beautiful images. And so, try to have a beautiful image every episode, and reasonable amount of slapstick. And one thing, if it works out, we did these homage to Inspector Clouseau and Cato. We'll have one of those, but this time I'll give something away that, because I'd like to see it. Patrick will be in like a full white fencing outfit. I think we'll look. I think if he, you see how you feel. But anyway, I think that.
Get to wear a mask.
Well, you want to, because I want to see your face. So, but yeah. Anyway, okay. So.
Well,
thank you, and thank you for having us and being such.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.